Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to talk about some of my last thoughts on the NFL draft before the Jaguars make their first selection later tonight. So, absolutely crazy we're at this point already, but here we are. I'm recording this the day before the draft, but for you guys, it is April 27th. It is time for the Jaguars, for the first time this offseason, to acquire a hopefully great player. You know, this is what the draft is. It is the best way to acquire talent. You're getting them cheap, you're getting them young, you're getting them with tons of potential, and so it's got to be exciting for everyone. You know, you just hope they hit the pick. And so, with that all said, let's go ahead and get started. So, first of all, tonight, for myself, tomorrow night, so on April 27th, I'm going to be down at the draft. I am hoping to be able to do a live stream sometime after the selection. Don't know if it'll be while we're still there waiting for other picks. Don't know if it'll be, when we're driving back. Really don't know a whole lot about like how much time is going to have to go by after. But I will try to tweet things out, kind of keep you guys updated if you want to join that. And we'll really just talk about the pick, talk about any of the big news because there's going to be a lot. I mean, aside from Jacksonville's pick alone, you're probably going to have one or two AFC South teams acquiring their quarterback of the future, so we definitely want to analyze that because, hey, as much as we may want to look at like these teams suck and we don't care about them, that's how the Titans felt about us for years, right? Felt like, oh, even Trevor Lawrence isn't going to be good for them, and sure enough, they lose to him in the final game of last year, and now they're the ones looking in from the outside, so it's important for us to consider that. So we're going to talk about all that stuff, any big NFL news as well, because I think you could see some players on the move again. So it's going to be exciting. But I'm going to talk about what I want to see for the Jaguars, kind of my draft plan. And I don't think that this is too far off from what possibly could be for the Jaguars. I think this is very possible. This is how they look at it. Don't know that for a fact, but just thoughts on it. So I got my big board pulled up here. I just want to give you a look at some of the players. Now, this is not a perfect one, I'll be honest. Kind of just tried to reorganize things the other day. See some information isn't complete, but generally where I have prospects ranked. And so you'll see the top guy really on my board that could be available at 24 is clearly Brian Branch. You know, you're talking about these other guys. Witherspoon, Gonzalez could be gone top 10. Johnson should be gone top 10, but will likely be like an early teens pick. And then you got a lot of quarterbacks, right? So, I mean, you're not landing any of those guys. But the top guy that people think is going to be there at 24, not going to be a surprise to you guys, but it's Brian Branch. And so acquiring him at 24 is the obvious best pick. And so what that'll do for your team, you upgrade your slot from being essentially your biggest weakness as far as just the talent on the roster, like your potential to develop is very low, and not a knock against Trey Herndon, but like he was UDFA, I believe, coming in the NFL. He's done a great job, developing, and I'm happy they stuck with him for this next year, at least on the roster. But he's not a guy that you want starting. You want him as a good insurance policy. And even with that, I think you can upgrade that insurance policy, especially when you consider some other things. So getting Brian Branch in the slot for this team is a huge deal because you go from a guy that you feel like is a low-end starter, to essentially having someone who is good enough to where they could actually become the best slot defender in the NFL. That is how good of a player Brian Branch is. Extremely instinctual, just so much to like about him. Hard hitter. I mean, he's a guy who would fit perfectly into this defense. You love what he would offer. Now, what I will say about this, I think this is very important to think about in case, say, Jacksonville makes this selection and then goes into the second or third round, picks another cornerback up. The problem with picking Brian Branch with the 24th pick is simply that you still need an outside corner that can start if either Tyson Campbell or Darius Williams goes down. That is still really important because if that happens, I don't think you're moving Branch to the outside. And if you put Trey Herndon out there, you have the same defense that you were running in week 10 against Kansas City this last year. And you are not going to feel good about that. So they still have to find an outside cornerback. So really, it's a choice of, do you want to get a cornerback that plays outside, inside, has that versatility like a Cam Smith, or maybe even a Deonte Banks? Or do you want to go after, the really great slot corner that's going to be a safety as well and maybe move there long term for your team? I would still go Brian Branch. I think he's the best player on the board at this point. But you have to realize that and understand that Jacksonville, if they pick him, is probably picking up another corner with a decent selection in this. Or, maybe you go to free agency, because I know the Falcons just released a guy that could actually be a pretty nice insurance policy on the outside. So, kind of my thoughts on Brian Branch. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. Everyone's talking about him falling to 24. This is not a prospect who should be available at 24. There is no doubt in my mind about that. He should be gone earlier. And so there's a few different ways he's off the board. I think really any team could consider him just because of how good he is as a player. Even though he is a safety or a slot corner, whichever way you prefer him. Because we've seen him succeed at both, right? But the Packers, at 13, that's a bit rich for me. I mean, they could do it if they want. Obviously, I've got him at 9 here, but it's positional value too. You got to consider, what if the Packers trade back? That is very much on the table. I think there's even rumors about it. If they trade back, well, Brian Branch could be the best player on their board pretty easily in that scenario. They need a safety or a slot corner. I don't know which one, but they can make that selection. You're also talking about, a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where we really don't know what they're going to do, but slot corner is a need. This is an easy player to pick. This is the guy is going to succeed in the NFL, so you go make that selection. And then after that, maybe the Chargers want to pair him up with Derwin James, make a move like that, but I don't think Minnesota or Baltimore is doing that. Both teams acquired safeties last year in the draft. So, yeah, I don't think it's more likely than not that he's available at 24. It's probably 50-50 or worse for the team. But I don't know if I'd move up either. I wouldn't blame the team for it, but I also think there's other routes you can go, and you may want to conserve your capital. But if they want to, say, move a 4th to go move up, that's completely fine with me. Just not sure you can move up as far as you need to. Because if you want to acquire him and he's going off the board earlier, he's probably going quite a few picks before, because I don't think the teams immediately in front of you are making that move. So, what's the contingency plan then? For myself, what I think the Jaguars should do if he's not on the board for them at 24. The best plan, and we'll have to talk about kind of how the value works out here. We'll give you an idea. I think, and this is trying to be more creative, which we've seen Trent Baalke do with the Calvin Ridley trade, move back from 24 with the Arizona Cardinals if they are interested in moving up, and see if you can use that as part of the capital to acquire a player like Budda Baker. Because if you get Budda Baker, you can play him in the slot a ton, you can still rotate air players in, let Baker play really wherever he needs to. You get a guy who's a surefire thing still, and you're essentially just moving back in the first round. You still have all your picks. Maybe you got to throw in a 4th, but we look at the pick value. Going from 24, so you got 740 points here, to 560. There's about 180. So you're talking about a mid-3rd round pick, and that's around what they're talking about for this trade. Could be a 2nd they need. If it is, maybe you throw in an extra 4th. And that's completely fine with me, if I'm going to be honest. Or maybe you're just looking at trading, say, your 2nd rounder and getting a future pick in return, whatever you got to do, right? I would then, if Brian Branch is off the board, focus on acquiring Budda Baker. I'd have some plans in the works, and I would send it to the Arizona Cardinals the second that happens, if it does. Because here's what you can do. If you cannot land Brian Branch there, say you move back from 24 to 34, there's a player on the board I would have very much considered at 24, not over everyone else, but still in the conversation, that I believe will be available at the 34th selection that helps at that area, and that's Cam Smith. So what happens if you pick up Budda Baker, you move back, maybe give up your last 4th round pick, and you still get Cam Smith? You got a guy who can play in the slot if you need it, can move outside, versatile at corner. You fix your outside issues, with the backups, that is. And you have Budda Baker in your secondary, can move into the slot too, and can move all around. And so you're limiting the snaps for your starters, but quite frankly, that's kind of what you prefer if you can make it work with the cap, because you're going to have your guys fresher on the field, and it's just better for a football team than running guys 1,200 snaps a season or whatever it is. So I look at that and see that as the clear second option to me, but it really depends on a lot of things, because you've got to make a big transition in your plans if you're going to make moves like that. But that's what I would be on board with if Brian Branch isn't there. Because if Branch is available at 24, you're thinking, oh, okay, well, he's essentially going to be our version of Budda Baker. We're going to get a great safety, and he's going to play in the slot for us early in his career, much like Budda Baker did. So, I mean, that's ideally the scenario, and you could, if you want to even make an argument, the second idea is better, but, I think they're both solid. You could also see the Jaguars be in a situation where they can't trade back. Might not be a suitor, because in this draft, there are a lot of teams that want to move back. So if that's the case, then it's going to be hard to acquire more picks if you're going to move back, because the offers are going to be less because teams aren't as desperate. So it might be hard to make a move if Branch is off the board. If that's the case, then you probably go after someone like O'Cyrus Torrence at 24. If Deonte Banks is there, you're definitely considering him. And if you want, throw Dalton Kincaid into the mix. I would prefer we aren't in a situation where we have to take an edge. And if we do, that's fine. Go take it. But there's still a lot of talent in free agency. And I think you can easily, and I mean easily, help out your pass rush through that. Just getting a veteran like Justin Houston, getting him cheap, that makes a ton of sense. You can even talk about, someone like Leonard Floyd. Who's been a solid contributor throughout his career. Isn't crazy old yet. Still has some tread on the tires. Quite a bit, actually. Or even throw in Yannick Ngakoue if you think things can be resolved there. Now, I'm a bit more questionable about that because it was bad when he was here. But, there's even rumors about that right now. So, that's kind of how I feel about that first pick. I think Torrence could also be great, but he's your fallback option if you can't try to find a way to help your secondary. Now, as far as talking about outside... Oh, actually, hold up. One last thought on that, because I forgot about this. If you're picking Torrence at 24, I'm still negotiating for Budda Baker. That's not going to change. And I'm willing to give up 56 if you need to get, say, a future 4th in return, whatever you got to do. Just try to get Arizona in that trade to take on some of the cap. That is going to be important, so you still have room to acquire a couple players in free agency after. Doesn't need to be huge deals, but you need a little bit to get guys on this team, because there's still going to be a hole on this roster, you imagine. So I would still acquire Budda Baker, essentially in any scenario where you're not getting Brian Branch. Whether or not the team does that, we don't know. It's more unlikely than not, right? There's 32 teams that could go get him, or technically 31. So, all right, we'll move forward now. Just want to talk about a couple prospects I would like later in the draft, and we'll see how the board shakes up, obviously. There are a lot of players I'm high on after round 1, but the 2 that I'm going to list as being the highest on, players I would absolutely love to see come to Jacksonville, would be Xavier Hutchinson and Zach Harrison. For Hutchinson, I think he is the absolute perfect backup for this team at receiver, and a guy who after this season say things don't go great with one of your receivers, can come in and start for you, can help out your roster a ton. I would love to be able to acquire Xavier Hutchinson in this draft. Fantastic contested ball guy. Going to go downfield, extend the field for you. You know, he's not an insane athlete, but he's still a good one. Ran pretty well at the combine for what people expected. I'm very impressed with all that. And the fact that right now he is considered as a 4th or 5th round prospect, to me, is blasphemy. It is absolute insanity that a receiver who you can at least feel comfortable with and say this guy has a really high floor in the NFL cannot be considered easily in this class of guys that are a lot of projection, a 2nd or 3rd round pick. And so if that's the case, if he's there at 88, I mean, you know, maybe you think you could game the system and get him later, but I would pick him at 88. I think that would be just fine. You get your backup there, you get a great insurance policy. You're not going to have to throw Tim Jones on the field full time if one guy goes down, and you're going to be happy with that. Your receiving room's going to look nice. You're getting Lawrence in there, a weapon. Really like that. But with Zach Harrison, say you got to go that route if Hutchinson's off the board for you, or you want to prefer Harrison over him. Harrison helps a lot too because you're going to get another defensive end that is still young. He's got plenty of potential at this point. And the size on this guy is just absolutely absurd. I mean, he is quite frankly way more talented, not athletically necessarily, but from a physical stature than almost every other person in this class. Like, arm length, the wingspan is just ridiculous. Inches and inches above other players. So you like those physical tools. You get him in probably the 3rd round. Maybe you go after him in the 2nd. That might be a little too early. But that's a nice player to go acquire. I mean, I'd feel pretty dang good about that. And letting him develop as a 3rd or 4th pass rusher and really figure things out. So that would be a pick I'd also love. I'll also throw out one more name in the mix. He's not on my big board, so I won't go down to him. But Davis Allen, I believe he's from Clemson, if I recall correctly. But he is an awesome tight end. He is not going to be one of your top prospects in this class. But for getting a backup, someone who could allow you to run the 2 tight end sets a little bit and fill in well for Evan Ingram, if say he goes down or you have another issue with him, you like what you see in Davis Allen. You think he could be really good with contested catches just as a receiver at the position. Not a fantastic blocker, but could offer you some of what Ingram does at a low price in the draft. So another name we're going to throw out there for sure. But those are guys I would love to acquire later in this draft. Talking about trading and kind of your draft capital, I would not make any moves at this point to give up future draft capital. I just simply don't think it's worth it. I don't want to lose picks in the future because we've already lost our 2nd likely. You know, if you assume Calvin Ridley is not just a 1-year guy on the team. So I'm not interested in that. You know, maybe, I don't know how it works. Maybe if they franchise tag Ridley, then it's a 3rd round pick. I'd have to investigate that, so maybe you're not giving up as much, but you're still giving up a pretty big pick, and I'd rather have a lot to work with next year. So I don't want to give up future capital. I'm fine giving up stuff this year, but talking about, you know, getting capital in the future, if you're offered that, I was very much considerate. I'd be completely fine bringing in some more draft picks for the next season because we're already going to have some compensatory ones. I like that. We got to add on. We got to pretty much try to compensate for what we lost with Calvin Ridley. So there's my thoughts on it. I think really with this draft, I want to see one of 2 things if you can't do both. And I don't know if you really can. But I want to see this team either turn the secondary into an absolute strength or complete the offensive line. Because you talk about the secondary, you've got players there. You've got talent at all those positions. I mean, I think Tyson Campbell and Andre Sisco are simple enough. And even with Darius Williams and Rayshawn Jenkins, they're players who really turned it on late in the season. And you like the way they're trending right now. But you can add a slot corner in. You need to add a slot corner in, quite frankly. And if you upgrade that, you really take care of your issues. But if you go, say, get Buda Baker on this team, or say you pick up another corner and Brian Branch moves back to safety a little bit, I mean, you're loaded. And that's what I want to see, because one of these units on the defense needs to be completely set, know what's going to be good, because that is going to help the other one. And I would prefer to do that with the secondary, because I think you can hit on impact players the first year rather than talking about the pass rush, where there are a lot of solid players, but you can resolve that in free agency pretty easily. I would prefer that, quite frankly. So that's how I feel about that. I'd like the secondary to be great after this. As far as the offensive line, that's more so if you got to pick Osiris Torrance. And I think just that pick alone does fix the offensive line pretty much in its entirety, unless you're just absolutely riddled by injuries, because you have that interior depth, and you can look at Torrance as a swing tackle if you need to, just like some NFL teams are. So there's my final thoughts on the draft. I am pumped for it. I am excited to be out there. I hope they make a great selection. I hope that they're right when it comes down to us looking back on this years in the future. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoy it tonight. It's going to be a great time. But with that said, go Jags.